For months, the story surrounding the gas money incident had been repeated, reshaped, and recycled across countless channels. In nearly every retelling, BJ stood at the center of the controversy, a supposed instigator, manipulator, or aggressor who somehow forced Larry into participating in something he didn't want to do. That version of events spread quickly because it came from the loudest voices, not the most honest ones. But as people began revisiting the timeline and comparing statements, patterns emerged that pointed in a dramatically different direction. The truth, once laid bare, placed responsibility not on BJ, but on the two people who benefited most from the chaos, Eric Carroll and Patrick. The shift began when viewers started examining Eric's own words. They noticed how the timeline didn't support his claims. They noticed how accusations seemed to appear only after his relationship with the family deteriorated. And most importantly, they noticed how the supposed gas theft crisis only became an emergency after Eric needed ammunition in his effort to build a case against the household. For weeks before his sudden outrage, Eric had never mentioned gas being stolen, never mentioned Larry being coerced, never hinted at abuse, fear, or manipulation. But the moment BJ returned from jail and stopped cooperating with him, the narrative changed overnight. People began to question why the story escalated so dramatically on August 24th. That date kept appearing again and again. Whenever Eric told the world he had to rush back to save the family. Yet no one could point to any new event that justified the urgency. Nothing had happened on the property. No threats had been made. No violence had occurred. The only thing that happened that week was BJ's decision to resume living her life independently, without relying on Eric or letting him dictate her interactions. And that independence threatened Eric's plan. The more viewers studied the timeline, the clearer it became that Eric and Patrick had motives that went far beyond the well-being of the family. Videos revealed how emotionally attached Eric had become to the idea of bringing Timmy back home with him. He spoke about it constantly, sometimes openly, sometimes in coded statements, but always with certainty. He had already imagined himself as Timmy's guardian, father figure, or whatever role he believed would elevate his image. The problem was that the people standing in his way were not incompetent adults. They were fully capable individuals, Larry, Betty, and BJ. To justify bypassing all three, Eric needed more than speculation. He needed a narrative that painted them as unfit, dangerous, or negligent. And that is where the gas story became useful. During the period when Eric's accusations first surfaced, none of the other family members acknowledged anything resembling the scenario he described. Larry never reported feeling unsafe. Betty never described BJ as manipulative or threatening. Not once did anyone mention blackmail regarding gas money. It was only Eric, loud, persistent, and increasingly dramatic, who insisted the situation was dire. He repeated it until others started believing him. But even in his repetition, inconsistencies began slipping through. The first version of the story was simple. BJ was holding the phone hostage and controlling the household. But that didn't explain why Eric was still having conversations with multiple people on the property, many of which he recorded or referenced publicly. Then came the second layer. BJ was blackmailing Larry to steal gas for her. But that didn't fit with what viewers could see. Larry freely interacting with BJ, helping her voluntarily, and showing no signs of coercion. And then, when that version lost steam, the accusation transformed again into vague concerns about abuse, neglect, and danger. Each version grew more extreme than the last, and the escalation aligned perfectly with Eric's growing desperation to justify removing Timmy from the home. Patrick's involvement also grew during this period. Once seen as a neutral bystander, he suddenly became Eric's echo chamber. He repeated whatever Eric claimed, reinforcing every accusation without offering evidence. Together, the two build a narrative that looked convincing only because the same lies were told from two mouths instead of one. But the cracks were impossible to ignore once people looked closely. The moment BJ was released from jail, Eric's demeanor toward the family changed entirely. The friendly interactions, the bonding moments, the cheerful outings he filmed, all of that vanished. In its place came frustration, agitation, and sudden declarations of danger. The shift was too abrupt to ignore. It didn't come from new events. It came from a disrupted plan. And viewers began recognizing that Eric's anger wasn't about safety. It was about control. His own statements exposed this clearly. When he believed BJ would remain out of the picture, he behaved casually, even confidently. But the moment Larry bailed her out, Eric's agenda began to unravel. He needed to reestablish dominance, and the quickest way to do that was to convince the public and authorities that BJ posed a threat. Yet no one on the property ever confirmed feeling threatened by her. In contrast, multiple clips revealed how much pressure was coming from Eric and Patrick. They arrived unannounced. They pushed narratives the family never spoke of. They exaggerated every detail. They misrepresented dates, arrests, and circumstances. And the more people analyzed their behavior, the more obvious it became that they were manufacturing problems to justify their involvement. The gas money accusation was their most powerful tool because it painted BJ as both manipulative and criminal. But as viewers compared clips, they realized how many contradictions Eric told about the story. His timeline shifted constantly. His details changed with each retelling. And most importantly, he ignored key facts. Larry was an adult who made his own choices, and there was no evidence, none, that he was forced into anything. When Eric spoke about saving Larry, he used fear-based language. He spoke as though an emergency was unfolding, though the only emergency came from his voice. And when he spoke about running back to Odd to protect Timmy, it became clear that every accusation served a single purpose: to remove obstacles between him and guardianship. Patrick played the supportive role in this narrative, amplifying Eric's claims and helping him create illusions of danger. Together, they gave viewers a storyline that was easy to believe because it fit dramatic expectations. But once people dug into the truth, they could no longer ignore what the evidence showed. The gas money issue was never a crisis. It was never forced. It was never orchestrated by BJ. It was a manipulation created by Eric and backed by Patrick to justify their plan. As the truth unraveled, more people began questioning how far the two men were willing to go. Why fabricate an emergency? Why demonize a family already living fragile lives? Why weaponize public sympathy for personal gain? And why, above all else, did Eric seem so determined to make Timmy dependent on him rather than the people who had raised him? These questions became the foundation of a larger conversation, one that would expose far more than just lies about gas money. It would reveal how one man's ambition and another man's willingness to follow led to consequences that reshaped the future of an entire family. As people dug deeper into the timeline, they began piecing together the series of events that led to the gas money accusation becoming the centerpiece of Eric's case against the Whittaker family. What emerged was not a story of concern, safety, or protection, but a calculated move designed to create panic, justify interference, and ultimately shift public perception against BJ, Larry, and Betty, all while painting Eric and Patrick as the only level-headed problem solvers in the entire situation. At first glance, the gas story seemed minor. A tank filled here, a tank emptied there, someone borrowing money, someone filling up a container, not the kind of thing that normally spirals into a crisis. But the way Eric presented it made it sound like a criminal operation. And the more he spoke, the bigger the story became, ballooning into a fabricated emergency that existed only in his own narrative. The earliest mention of gas appeared casually, tucked into a long rant about BJ controlling everything and keeping the phone in her camper. But as viewers now understand, that wasn't a sign of concern. It was the first breadcrumb in a plot he intended to escalate. Within a day, the story grew from a minor household disagreement into a claim that BJ was forcing Larry to steal gas for her. There was no footage showing Larry in distress, no recording of him complaining, no message from him asking for help, nothing but Eric's voice. And by that point, Eric had already laid out his goals publicly. He wanted Timmy, and he wanted BJ gone. What struck viewers most as they revisited the live streams and posts from that week was how suddenly Eric's tone shifted. Before BJ came home, there were no accusations of abuse, no claims of blackmail, no hint that Larry was in danger. But the moment she returned, Eric began shaping a narrative so rapidly that it felt pre-scripted. And that's because it likely was. The gas money accusation became the perfect narrative tool because it allowed Eric to label BJ as manipulative without needing evidence. It gave him a way to cast Larry as a victim, Betty as neglectful, and himself as the only one willing to step in. And because he already had Patrick ready to echo everything he said, the story spread fast across their shared audience. Patrick's role in this escalation cannot be understated. Viewers once thought he was an outsider dragged into the chaos, but the timeline tells a different story. Patrick wasn't just agreeing with Eric, he was amplifying him. Every time Eric presented a new twist on the gas narrative, Patrick validated it with his own commentary, creating the illusion of two independent witnesses confirming the same series of events. The truth was that Patrick knew only what Eric told him, but by repeating it, he became the second pillar supporting the lie. Together, they created a closed loop of misinformation. Eric invented the story, Patrick confirmed it, and their audience absorbed it as fact. Meanwhile, BJ was never given a voice in the narrative. Larry was never asked directly. Betty, who often struggled to articulate complex thoughts under pressure, was spoken over or spoken for. And because viewers wanted to believe Eric cared, they didn't question the gaps in the story. But the timeline exposed those gaps. People noticed that Eric claimed BJ had just been arrested to heighten the sense of danger, even though her mugshot was weeks old. They noticed that he insisted the phone was being held hostage, even though he was still communicating with the family. They noticed that he drove back to West Virginia claiming it was a life-or-death crisis, only to arrive and film content as though nothing was wrong. The urgency existed only in Eric's voice, not in the Whittaker household. As more contradictions surfaced, attention turned to Patrick's involvement. His sudden alignment with Eric during this period raised questions. What motivated him? What did he gain? Why did he help escalate the panic instead of slowing it down? What viewers now see is that Patrick played the role Eric needed at the exact moment he needed it. Eric's credibility alone might not have been enough to sway public opinion. But having Patrick, a separate creator, a different personality, someone viewers had grown familiar with, backing him up made the narrative solid enough to withstand scrutiny. Or so they thought. Patrick helped Eric bury BJ under a pile of allegations she never heard coming. He helped frame Larry as helpless instead of independent. He helped suggest that Betty was enabling wrongdoing simply by existing in her own home. And he did all of this without offering a single shred of first-hand evidence. Everything he said came from Eric. The gas money accusation was not just a lie, it was a tool. And both men wielded it aggressively to remove obstacles from their path. The most revealing part of the timeline came when viewers examined the days surrounding August 24th. On one day, Eric claimed everything was fine. On the next, he claimed he needed to rush back to save Larry. From the footage from that exact week, neither Larry nor Betty appeared distressed. They weren't acting scared. They weren't whispering for help. They weren't signaling danger in any way. Yet Eric insisted repeatedly that a crisis was underway. He told viewers Larry was being blackmailed. He told viewers the phone was being hidden. He told viewers BJ was stealing gas. He told viewers Larry was trembling in fear. He told viewers someone needed to rescue Timmy. But every detail in that story fell apart once the footage was reviewed objectively. The family on camera looked like the same family they had always been, living in poverty, yes, but stable, comfortable in their own routines, and not displaying any signs of fear or coercion. Meanwhile, Eric was the only one escalating tensions. He created a false sense of urgency. He created danger where none existed. He created a crisis that justified his arrival. And Patrick backed every word. The real purpose of the gas story reveals itself when you strip away Eric's narration. It was simply step one in a larger plan to argue that the adults in the home were unfit, thus clearing the path for Timmy to be placed with Eric instead. If Eric had admitted that Larry and Betty were capable caregivers, he would lose his justification. If he acknowledged BJ's humanity or her relationship with her family, the narrative would crumble. If he accepted that the family had support from others, his plan would fall apart. So instead, he rewrote them as dysfunctional, dangerous, reckless, unpredictable. In that version of the story, only Eric could provide stability. Only Eric could offer safety. Only Eric could save them. It was a hero complex built on fiction, and viewers who once praised him now see the manipulation clearly. The gas story didn't expose BJ. It exposed Eric, his motives, his tactics, and his willingness to lie. And it exposed Patrick, who stood beside him and strengthened the lie instead of questioning it. What people understand now is that the crisis wasn't happening at the Whittaker home. It was happening in Eric's strategy. His plans were unraveling. His storyline was breaking. His shot at guardianship was slipping out of reach. And so he did what manipulators always do when confronted with resistance. He created a new emergency. But every conspiracy collapses eventually, and this one is no exception. Thanks to those who carefully pieced together the real timeline, the false accusations are finally being dismantled. The truth is out. BJ didn't force Larry to steal gas. Larry wasn't a victim. Betty wasn't negligent. The danger wasn't real. The crisis came from Eric and Patrick, two men who manipulated a fragile family to serve their own narrative. Comment below, what do you think? The third week of August would later become known by viewers as the turning point. The exact moment Eric shifted from filming content with the Whittaker family to actively constructing a case against them. For nearly 2 months, he portrayed the household as quirky, impoverished, misunderstood, but harmless. He filmed moments of laughter, offered rides to town, brought gifts, and played the role of a benevolent outsider who had stumbled into their lives with compassion. But the moment BJ returned from jail, that tone evaporated overnight. The shift was so abrupt that people reviewing the timeline now recognize it for what it truly was. Not a discovery of danger, but a reaction to losing control. Before BJ's return, Eric had nearly uninterrupted access to Timmy. He filmed him daily, showcased him as the central figure of the channel, framed himself as Timmy's protector, and repeatedly teased the idea of bringing him to Georgia. But BJ's reappearance disrupted the dynamic. She wasn't willing to let Eric run the household. She wasn't willing to let him make promises to her family without accountability. And most importantly, she wasn't willing to let her little brother become a pawn. Eric took that as a threat, not to Timmy, but to him. That's when the lies began. The gas money story, as viewers now understand, wasn't some isolated exaggeration. It was the first domino in a meticulously crafted series of accusations meant to paint every adult in the home as unfit. On August 24th, he declared, without evidence, that BJ was stealing gas and forcing Larry to help her. The audience, already conditioned to trust him as the rescuer, absorbed the claim instantly. But that was just the beginning. Over the next 48 hours, Eric escalated rapidly. He repeated the gas story until it sounded like fact. He showed BJ's 3-week-old mugshot as if she had been arrested that morning. He claimed the family was in immediate danger because the phone was locked in her camper, even though he continued speaking with Larry and Betty throughout the day. He even insisted that the situation was so dire he needed to drive 10 hours immediately, despite having no footage, no calls, no photos, nothing to support his claims. The urgency existed only in his voice. The timeline shows a striking pattern. Every major accusation coincided with a moment when Eric feared losing influence. On the same day he lied about the eviction notice, he told viewers, multiple times, that he intended to bring Timmy home with him. By placing BJ at the center of a fabricated crisis, he removed her as an obstacle. By depicting Larry as terrified, he positioned himself as the only reliable father figure. By portraying Betty as overwhelmed, he implied she was incapable of caring for her grandson. None of these narratives came from the family themselves. Every dramatic detail came straight from Eric. Patrick was right beside him throughout this escalation. While Eric shaped the story, Patrick validated it. He nodded along. He repeated the same accusations. He added dramatic language to emphasize urgency. And most damaging of all, he used his own platform to amplify the misinformation, allowing Eric's claims to circulate far beyond their original audience. In retrospective compilations, viewers noticed that Patrick rarely offered independent observations. He didn't point to anything he personally saw or experienced. He simply echoed whatever Eric said, reinforcing the narrative without ever questioning its origin. This created a powerful illusion. If two separate creators said the same thing, it must be true. But the truth was that Patrick knew no more about the situation than the audience did. Every word he repeated came from Eric. And as the pressure mounted, their accusations took on a disturbing new shape. Instead of simply claiming BJ was manipulative, Eric escalated to implying she was dangerous. He insisted she was preventing the family from contacting him, even as he continued speaking with them. He portrayed her as violent, even though no such behavior was ever shown. Then, only after the gas story gained traction, he began hinting at abuse and neglect, accusations that appeared nowhere in earlier footage or interactions. It became clear that Eric wasn't reporting problems, he was creating them. People reviewing the streams now see how methodical he was. He began with the least serious accusation, gas money, to test whether the audience would accept his claims without evidence. When they did, he raised the stakes. Each day brought a new allegation, each more dramatic than the last. And every time, Patrick reappeared to reinforce the narrative. By the end of that week, Eric had laid out an entire storyline. BJ was abusive. Larry was terrified. Betty was helpless. The home was unsafe. Timmy needed to leave immediately. Not a single person in the family said these words. Not a single clip supported the claims. Not a single witness stepped forward. Everything came from Eric and Patrick. The most revealing evidence lies in what the audience saw with their own eyes. When Eric wasn't narrating, the family looked the same as always, quiet, routine-driven, and comfortable in each other's presence. Larry did not appear afraid of BJ, but he did not seem confused or coerced. There was no chaos, no shouting, no physical threat, no panic. The danger only existed when Eric talked about it, and he talked about it constantly. He inserted the word dangerous into nearly every live stream. He repeated that he had to get back immediately. He insisted that taking Timmy was an emergency. And when adult services ultimately removed the family from their home, Eric used that removal as retroactive validation for the false narrative he built. But what viewers now understand is chilling. APS didn't remove the family because of danger. It removed them because of the report Eric filed. He created the incident. He caused the investigation. He triggered the intervention. And he did it after spending weeks undermining every potential caregiver within the family. If Betty seemed overwhelmed, it was because Eric and Patrick flooded her world with conflict. If Larry seemed confused, it was because they pushed him into the center of a fake crisis. If BJ seemed defensive, it was because they publicly vilified her for the world to see. This was not a rescue. This was sabotage. One of the most disturbing revelations viewers discovered was how Eric framed his intentions. He repeatedly insisted he was just trying to help, but his actions contradicted that narrative at every turn. He didn't provide financial support. He didn't offer long-term solutions. He didn't bring stability. Instead, he brought conflict, division, and fear. He filmed everything, not to document truth, but to build evidence for the story he wanted to tell. He staged confrontations. He exaggerated problems. He manipulated timelines. He twisted normal household interactions into signs of danger. And Patrick, the useful idiot, in many viewers' eyes, validated every step. By the time APS intervened, the damage was already done. The family was scattered, their routines shattered, their home left empty. People cried for them, prayed for them, demanded answers on live stream after live stream. But Eric offered none. Instead, he shifted back into his familiar pattern, using tragedy to gain sympathy, expand his platform, and redirect blame toward anyone but himself. Patrick drifted away quietly, avoiding accountability, leaving viewers to argue among themselves about who was at fault. But the timeline tells the story clearly. The gas money accusation began as a lie. The crisis it created was intentional. The division that followed was engineered. Eric didn't uncover danger. He fabricated it, and Patrick ensured the world believed it. What happened next would expose even more, but by the end of this week, the pattern was undeniable. The crisis wasn't born in the Whittaker home. It was born in Eric's strategy. The truth had simply taken time to surface. Comment below what you think. As the weeks passed and more creators began examining the timeline independently, the gas money accusation that once seemed dramatic and urgent began to crumble. What had started as Eric's most sensational claim now looked like the weakest part of his story, an unraveling thread that exposed the larger tapestry of manipulation underneath. And the more people pulled on that thread, the clearer the truth became. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It began quietly, almost accidentally, when a viewer asked a simple question in a comment section. Why would BJ need Larry to steal gas for her? It wasn't framed as an attack. It wasn't skeptical. It was just a basic question, one Eric never answered. That moment opened the door. Other viewers began to notice inconsistencies they had ignored in the middle of the panic. They watched early streams where Larry and BJ interacted naturally, without any sign of conflict. They rewatched moments when Larry visited Betty inside the house, comfortably conversing while BJ tended to her camper. They examined the dates, the tone, the way Eric's voice carried more urgency than the footage around him. Slowly, people began to realize something. Not a single moment of video ever showed tension around gas, fuel, money, or coercion. It existed only in Eric's voice. Then came the second realization. Eric's repeated claim that BJ had just been arrested was obviously false. The mugshot he used was outdated by almost a month. The dramatic phrasing was designed to alarm viewers, not inform them. People who hadn't questioned it during the live stream began wondering why someone would manipulate the timeline so blatantly unless they needed panic to fuel a story. From there, the narrative cracked open entirely. Eric valued attention and engagement above all else. He said it himself countless times on his own platform. He preferred the path that brought in support, donations, subscriptions, and emotional investment. When the family's story turned slow, he created urgency. When viewers lost interest, he introduced conflict. And when he feared losing control of the household's access, particularly access to Timmy, he shifted the entire story into one of supposed danger. The gas money accusation served as the foundation for everything Eric built afterward. Once that story gained traction, he layered accusations of abuse, manipulation, and neglect on top of it. When people expressed concern, he interpreted it as validation. When Patrick echoed the claims, the story spread with even more force. But the unraveling didn't stop with viewers noticing inconsistencies. Creators who once supported Eric began analyzing the footage themselves. Some, formerly silent, stepped forward and admitted they never saw evidence supporting the accusations. A few even confessed that they initially believed Eric because of how convincingly he delivered the story. But once they reviewed the footage independently, they saw what had been hidden behind Eric's dramatic narration: a family living in poverty, yes, but not a family living in fear. One creator in particular broke down the timeline hour by hour, comparing Eric's statements to what the recordings actually showed. That analysis revealed shocking contradictions. In multiple live streams, Eric claimed the family wasn't allowed to speak to him because BJ had locked the phone away. Yet during the same period, he filmed conversations with Larry and received multiple messages directly from Betty. It became clear that the phone hostage claim was manufactured solely to intensify the sense of emergency. Another creator noticed that Eric described Larry as terrified and trembling, but in every clip from the same week, Larry appeared calm, smiling, even joking occasionally. His body language was consistent throughout the summer, slow-paced, soft-spoken, steady. There was no indication of fear, not until Eric described one. People began to recognize how powerfully Eric's narration shaped their perceptions. Without his voice, the footage told a very different story. And once viewers separated the audio from the visual, they began asking questions about everything else, from the eviction lie to the conveniently timed accusations of abuse. And then came the most revealing breakdown: the gas money story itself. When viewed alongside the other accusations Eric made that week, the gas claim became the cornerstone of his narrative because it involved a concrete action. Accusing someone of stealing gas felt tangible, believable, easy for viewers to latch onto. It was simple enough to repeat and dramatic enough to ignite fear. And once viewers believed BJ was capable of theft, they were more easily convinced she might be capable of more serious wrongdoing. That's how manipulation works. It starts small. Eric didn't need real evidence. He only needed a story compelling enough to create doubt. Once doubt existed, he could build any narrative on top of it. But the collapse of the gas story did more than just reveal Eric's tactics. It exposed Patrick's role in the deception. Patrick not only repeated the gas claim, he reinforced it with his own commentary. He used tones of disbelief, shock, and disappointment. He made the story feel three-dimensional, as though he too had witnessed it firsthand. But he hadn't. Every detail he shared came from Eric. His willingness to support the story without verification turned him from an outsider into an accomplice. People also noticed something else when rewatching Patrick's involvement. When Eric's accusations grew more extreme, Patrick rarely paused, hesitated, or questioned him. He remained agreeable, supportive, and eager to move the narrative forward. Whether he realized it or not, he became the second voice of a campaign that targeted an entire family. The collapse of the gas story forced viewers to reconsider Patrick's role entirely. Was he manipulated himself? Was he complicit for attention? Or was he simply unwilling to contradict the person providing him with content, visibility, and access? Those questions still linger. But what became undeniable was that the gas accusation, and the crisis built around it, was never based on truth. It was designed to accomplish something very specific: the removal of BJ, Larry, and eventually Betty as barriers to Eric's goal of controlling Timmy's narrative and potentially his custody. That goal became clearer when watchers noticed how Eric framed the timeline. He insisted Timmy would eventually come live with him. He talked about Timmy as though he were already part of his household. He repeatedly dismissed the capabilities of the adults who raised him. He exaggerated their weaknesses, minimized their strengths, and strategically ignored anyone who could contradict his version of events. The more the timeline was studied, the more alarming it became. Eric's behavior wasn't impulsive, it was patterned. It wasn't emotional, it was calculated. It wasn't protective, it was possessive. He created urgency where none existed, so he could position himself as the only solution. Patrick's involvement didn't start the fire, but helped spread it. And BJ was simply the first target in a sequence of planned eliminations. Once the gas story collapsed, everything else collapsed with it. Viewers began questioning every accusation that followed. They asked where the evidence was. They asked why the family never confirmed any of the things Eric claimed. They asked why, after seeing the truth, Eric never corrected himself or apologized. The silence was telling. In the end, what the collapse of the gas story truly revealed was not just a lie, but a pattern of control, a blueprint for how Eric manipulated viewers, creators, and even the family he claimed to help. It revealed how easily a vulnerable household could be turned into content, how quickly misinformation could dismantle trust, and how easily someone with a platform could rewrite reality. And it revealed how two men, one manipulative, one willing, created a storm that shattered a family already living on the edge. The truth is no longer hidden. People have seen the timeline. They have watched the footage without Eric's voice shaping their perceptions. They understand now that the gas money accusation was never the story, it was the strategy. A strategy designed to remove BJ. A strategy designed to weaken Larry. A strategy designed to derail Betty. A strategy designed to isolate Timmy. And a strategy that ultimately exposed itself. Comment below what you think. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.